Hello, welcome back to From Soft Serve. Today we find ourselves in vanilla Dark Souls 2 because I have updated the vanilla DS2 Remastered mod to version 0.65, which is overall, I think, a somewhat small update, but it does include the textures, the extra textures I had done for my Scholar DS2 mod. And so I ended up backporting them to vanilla Dark Souls 2. So to recap, my vanilla Dark Souls 2 remastered mod includes upscaled textures, some new normal maps, dynamic shadows, better mesh texture LODs, and also I recommend for it running it with Vulkan instead of DirectX 9 because Scholar runs with DirectX 11, which is arguably why it got all the modding focus and love, because it came out the next year, and so they just moved over to that, and Scholar's been the one that gets the mods. But vanilla Dark Souls 2, which, you know, I was actually surprised back before I started this project to find out it was still on Steam and the servers were still live. They did shut down the vanilla Dark Souls 2 servers for, I think it was Xbox 360 and PS3. But the PC specific servers for vanilla DS2 are still online. And I guess, yeah, I was just surprised. It was kind of expensive when I bought it. It didn't really go on a good sale. But yeah, Scholar went to DirectX 11, and so it was just a more modern render. There wasn't much reason for them to make mods for both versions. So mod tools, a lot of mod tools just don't work with vanilla Dark Souls 2. But I was able to mod Scholar and then copy those files back over into how vanilla DS2 likes it. They have a slightly different folder arrangement, but it's pretty minor. And yeah, so you get better textures and normal maps and dynamic shadows and mesh texture LODs. And on top of that, the last thing I've been doing kind of with all my different projects is I do have an additional reshade on top that you can use. Totally optional, but it includes this newest version of the reshade that's now actually in the file itself, like the actual mod. You don't have to download it as a separate thing. It's just an INI that you can use if you want, and if you don't have to. But this one, it includes temporal anti-aliasing, actual TAA done through reshade, so not using FXAA that's built in like with the in-game option. So you get better anti-aliasing for sure. And then beyond that, we have RTGI. So we get a little bit of bounce lighting in the inside environments, which I can show you here. As by turning it off and on, you'll see that the light bounces onto the nearby objects from different light sources, and also adds a little bit of shadowing and ambient occlusion while it's at it at the same time. I have a levels adjustment that just slightly alters like the black and white point, just barely. Like all FromSoft games kind of need this. It's just a slight level adjustment to the black point, and it just gives it, I think, an overall better look. It kind of reduces the washed out nature just a tad. And then beyond that, we have AMD Fidelity FX Contrast Adaptive Sharpening. Now, there's a lot of different sharpening, things you can use, but I've actually found this adaptive sharpening to be the best because it sharpens areas that are not very sharp, and then it leaves already sharp areas how they are. And so the way that it's actually adaptive, and then it adapts to the contrast of the scene, I haven't found anything that's better than that in terms of the results that you get. But let's warp around a little bit. To kind of see how it looks with RTGI and all the good stuff that comes with this. And the only thing I haven't been able to port yet is the bonfire shadow casting. And that's because that relies on a map object instance param file that I don't want to copy that over from Scholar, because obviously we know that vanilla varies from Scholar. So I don't want to make any object changes. I don't want to make any placement changes. And so it's kind of touchy that I don't want to do that. So there's been limitations on certain things I can add. But another thing in the future I'll be doing more of is actually adjusting the filters for Dark Souls 2, which is essentially G params that you got with Dark Souls 3, Sekiro, and Elden Ring. It's the same system. They just called it something else before we got the G params. But basically that adjusts all different ways that the game looks. And you can actually adjust like the shadow cascade distance. And so I have adjusted it for Majula so far. Oh, actually you'll notice there's a little bit of a fog issue going on here with one of the reshade things. And so normally what it does is that you can tell it where to cut off with the effect that it's doing, so that way the in-game like distant fog actually doesn't like goof up and look fucking weird. I thought I had it correctly. Okay, so let's go back to where we had it. So that's the tuning of the RTGI is a larger part of it, because you actually have to go in and basically you turn on all the experimental, intermediate, and advanced features. So you can go in here and then adjust the depth mask, which we've done that. Now we can go to HDR reduction, and you can see by modifying this, we can actually make the distant fog blend in. And it's not going to be perfect, but you make it to where it's very much not noticeable. You have light map saturation, shadow gamma, GI intensity, and so that's the actual like light that's bouncing off things that are receiving light. And so you don't want to go too crazy with that, but you can kind of dial that in. Then how much shadowing gets added as well, and so there's a lot of things you can play with. I usually put them kind of in the middle. Ambient color for like the actual scene. You can actually handle or control the motion vectors, which is what controls adding this illumination, because it is doing it using the depth of the scene, so it's doing it temporally. Obviously RTGI would be preferable to do in the engine itself, but of course, as we know, Dark Souls 2's engine obviously does not have RTGI. Hell, even Elden Ring doesn't have RTGI. It has RT shadows mostly, and RT ambient occlusion, but it doesn't have a GI implementation, sadly. And this is where doing it through reshade is ideal. And the key is that it's performant. That's why I'm really jazzed about this RTGI. And I've been adding it to basically every single mod as an optional extra, because I run on a 2060, which is not a crazy card. It's pretty mid-range. Like, it came out in 2018, and I'm still, I target a pretty solid 60 FPS. Like you can see there, it's dropping to like 57, 58. So I still kind of tune that. There's certain things you can do to kind of lower the performance, or up the performance just a bit. And yeah, here's a good example of the on versus off. And you can see the RTGI adds pretty nice light that is matching the lights that's actually coming in. It looks a lot more realistic that's hitting this area. And so it's really cool. They call it, it's called Damp RT. It's made by Zentian. And it's depth aware MIP mapped ray tracing. And I don't fully understand the next paragraph, but it sounds awesome. It's built around sampling MIP levels, which I do understand MIP levels, versus like the standard texture. There'll be MIP levels that will be lower distance or lower quality based upon the distance the camera or the player are at. So textures do that all the time, obviously, because you don't need to render as high of a texture if you're far enough away from it. So that's why there's MIP maps. And to approximate cone tracing in 2D space before extrapolating into 3D. So very cool, but basically it's just saying that it's doing it in a performant way. And that to me is the most interesting, because RT is a giant performance killer. And the other like experiences I've had with RTGI shaders has been kind of hit or miss, where a lot of the times I don't think it really works that well or makes a big difference. And so here we're actually getting like really fantastic results. and it's still performant, and I'm able to play at 60 FPS. That's crazy. And I'm not even on performance mode with reshade, so there you get a little bit more frames as well. But if we turn it off again, as you can see with the bonfire, huge difference. The illumination that hits all the rocks here, oh, it's so good. That's the ticket. You just get more realistic lighting, and it really is going to be about the light sources. So let's travel to. Let's go to a dark area. You can see kind of the interiors. But yeah, this is the best that vanilla Dark Souls 2 has ever looked or ran. And I don't know, I always want to make sure I'm giving some love to vanilla Dark Souls 2. Like, this interior scene looks fucking awesome. I absolutely love how... Now, of course, vanilla Dark Souls 2 and Scholar look incredibly similar. So really, you're getting the same experience between this and my Scholar mod, but... God, it just looks so good. And, yeah, so you can kind of see the light bouncing around the scene. Specifically, the bonfire itself receives nice illumination right around it. And even the Phantom is receiving the light, which it technically shouldn't, but that's fine. Okay, I got my Claymore, my Baymore, I guess as they call it. And, God, Dark Souls 2 is a good-looking game sometimes. Sometimes not, but, oh my god. Oh yeah, the other thing I was able to port from Scholar for this last version is I actually ported the point lights adjustments that I've made to a lot of the maps, and my Scholar mod is make them shadow casting. I was able to backport that to vanilla Dark Souls 2 as well. So now you get more shadow casting point lights in more areas, and it just looks better. Looks all around much better. You jerk ass. Let's see what my frame rate is. Now, admittedly, when running it through Vulkan, it is compiling the shaders as it's encountering things, so it doesn't have like a pre-compilation step, because of course it can't. It's running it at runtime, so as it basically, because it's converting this to DirectX 9 to Vulkan, so you're getting a bit of overhead there, and I think some people might wonder, like, why is it even worth going to Vulkan? So that is actually due to how DirectX 9 versus Vulkan works, or even DirectX 9 versus DirectX 11. So basically, the big problem is that DirectX 9, when you try running reshade on DirectX 9, you can get most of the shaders to work, but not all of them, especially for the more intensive things, like obviously RTGI. The DirectX 9 version of reshade, it will crash when it's trying to compile those shaders because it just runs out of memory. DirectX 9 is very, very constrained on its memory usage, and DirectX 11 just simply doesn't have that problem. So with Scholar, you're totally fine by default. You don't need to do anything with Scholar. But here, DirectX 9 just can't hash it. So on this mod, you know, I run it through on the actual mod description, is that when you install reshade, and for whatever reason, it took me a little while to figure this out, months and months ago. So basically, the way that DXVK, which is the Vulkan wrapper that's actually handling this, how it works is it drops in a d3d9.dll file, and that picks up the game as it's launching and then takes over and uses that DLL to then wrap it into Vulkan and then render it that way. The problem becomes, in my brain, I just wasn't thinking about it correctly. When you install reshade, I was stuck in this idea of like, okay, well, I got to download the DirectX 9 version, which isn't actually how reshade works. You just download reshade, pick the game you want to install it on, and then it'll ask you, okay, what kind of game is it? So I would get to that step and I'd always choose, oh, DirectX 9, yeah. And I didn't think that I am converting it to Vulkan. So you actually need to install and tell reshade when you're installing it to use Vulkan. And then that will work just fine. Same thing when you're using like the RPCS3 emulator, you're actually choosing Vulkan, so you can actually have your emulated games use reshade, which is really cool. But yeah, Vulkan is obviously better when it comes to CPU-dependent things. GPU, it's not really going to benefit a whole lot there. I use it for Prepare to Die as well, because that version is also DirectX 9. Also, this character's like a level 120 or something, so that's why I'm not dying. I'm pretty leveled up. I've done the DLCs on this character. If anyone's wondering, just as a personal recommendation... Oh, also, these guys don't react to fire in vanilla, unfortunately. That was a good Scholar change, is they get scared by the fire. But for anyone who's played Scholar, which I think is obviously the majority of people, that's their first playthrough, right? I actually do recommend doing a playthrough of vanilla. You know, if you can catch it on sale, which is pretty rare, but hopefully you can. I actually do recommend playing through vanilla Dark Souls 2 as well, because it's actually got quite a bit of differences. Depends on the area. There's some areas that are not as good as Scholar, and there's some areas I think that are actually better than Scholar. For me, it's a bit of a wash, right? Where overall it's like, eh. I remember the first time I played through vanilla Dark Souls 2, which was last year, I want to say, before I started this side project. Because I always had heard about it. I was like, well, I only really played Scholar. And I was surprised that, quite honestly, you should just... I guess I didn't find, like, the big reason that Scholar exists, if that makes sense. Like, for them to wait a whole year and do another version of the game. When I was playing through vanilla, I was like, this is perfectly fine. Like, this feels like Dark Souls 2. If anything, there's certain areas that are toned down to, like, not be as ganky. And I just couldn't see the big reason of, like, we need to overhaul the whole game. I think that's what surprised me the most. I just didn't really see that happening. So yeah, these point lights here are shadow casting now because of porting it from my Scholar mod. And now, of course, some people will ask if this will ever work with the DS2 lighting engine mod, and no, not really, because it obviously that's based around DirectX 11, so it's based on Scholar, of course. And even if you convert, because there actually is a wrapper that exists where you can wrap DirectX 9 into DirectX 11 or 12, and I did actually try that and then try to get it to run basically the lighting engine, but it didn't work, which is understandable because it's basically wrapping DirectX 9 into DirectX 11, and then that DirectX 11 is then jumping into the dxgi.dll that lighting engine uses. So it's too many wrappers, too many things, and it couldn't, and it's totally understandable. And I had mentioned that on Twitter, and yeah, the Rage Vitamins guy that makes the lighting engine, he was like, yeah, even if it did work, there'd probably be like a ton of issues. Ooh, that skybox looks rough. I thought I upscaled that. Or maybe that's just for the cutscene? I don't know. Let's check out Lost Bastille. I think I'm getting some CPU, like kind of stuttery looking performance. Let me go into performance mode just to help out a bit. At least it looks not super smooth to me. Admittedly, vanilla DS2 will never be as smooth as Scholar because it's a native DirectX 11 application. And honestly, Scholar is one of the best optimized From Software titles. The only one better than that is Dark Souls Remastered, but that's not technically due to From Software. That's due to Q-Lock. Dark Souls Remastered is like one of the only releases of a FromSoft game that doesn't really have frame pacing issues, and it's optimized like hell. It's so good. Best part of Dark Souls Remastered is the performance for sure. The engine upgrades easily. Let's go upstairs, and then I'll probably cut off the video because it's just me rambling about Vulkan versus DirectX 9 versus Scholar versus Vanilla, and I'm sure some people enjoy that. I enjoy talking about it because I love Dark Souls 2. I'm one of the few that I honestly love both versions. With Dark Souls 2, I'm like, play either one. Like, obviously Scholar is probably the preferred option because it has modding support, more modding support, and that's the version that's going to get all the newest mods. It's not going to be vanilla because it can't. So that's what this mod is, basically, is like, I love vanilla, and I think it should get some love too, and I hope more people play this as well. I think if you didn't like Scholar, you're probably, like, you're not going to like vanilla either. You might like it a little bit better, but I don't see you changing your mind on Dark Souls 2 if you didn't like Scholar. And so I think that's a misconception of like, I think a lot of people assume vanilla is like massively different and it's a completely different game and it plays different, and that's just not true. You can look at all these bloodstains. Yeah, there's still people playing this for sure. I think it's a beautiful game, only made more beautiful by texture upgrading and dynamic shadows and all that good stuff. Let's test out the bounce lighting again. Ugh, it's so nice. Just a nice subtle boost to oh, look at those light shafts. Oh, they were so good at using light shafts. But yeah, there's a certain like crunchiness to the visuals for Dark Souls 2. It has a very like sharp appearance that I've always really liked, and it has a visual makeup that's just completely different from Dark Souls 1 and Demon Souls. Like, it doesn't share a lot of visual DNA in that way, if that makes sense. Obviously shares series DNA, but that's what I like about Dark Souls 2, is that overall it's so completely different from Dark Souls 1, and I really respect that. They could have just used the same Dark Souls 1 engine completely and then just made another Dark Souls 1, but man, they went in a different direction. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, but God, I respect them for trying. I think that's my favorite thing about it, is they fucking tried, and they did. It's just a quirky little game, and it's one of my favorite of all time. If anything, it's my second favorite to play behind Dark Souls 1, even though I consider Dark Souls 3 a better game than Dark Souls 2 overall. I have more fun playing Dark Souls 2 and being in the world. I enjoy that a lot more in Dark Souls 2. Dark Souls 3 is meant to be oppressive and like really dark and sad, and I think it does an excellent job at that. But it also means that I like playing Dark Souls 2 more because it's got a dreamlike quality and it's got these really varied areas, and this has just turned into a gush fest. That sounds weird. I don't like the sound of that. Don't clip that. This has just been me rambling on about how I love Dark Souls 2. Maybe I should just make a whole video on that. But, oh my god, stamina. Jesus Christ. Whoo, baby. Got him. Yeah, it's just a fucking quirky game. And I think once you accept it as that, it's a lot easier to love it. Because it does so many cool things, and Dark Souls 3 simply wouldn't exist without Dark Souls 2, which I know sounds like a really fucking stupid thing to say, but I mean more so in how it functions, and like if you play the Dark Souls 2 DLCs, which is really your window into what Dark Souls 2 would have been without all the development problems, because you look at the Shulva DLC, and that is essentially like 100% what DS3 used as its roadmap for level design, where it's basically not interconnected anymore, but it has looping pathways and shortcuts. And that's exactly what the Dark Souls 2 DLCs ended up doing, where the base game DS2, no. They basically just sewed the areas together. And then the warping, the Estus system is still with us today from Dark Souls 2, which is delightful. And then obviously, you know, Ferrous Lockstones came back in Elden Ring as Stone Sword keys. Power stancing kind of came back in DS3, but not, I mean, it's not really power stancing. It's basically, hey, we can wield 2 weapons. The best part about vanilla DS2, by the way, is the fact that they don't have those fucking statues. I hate those fucking statues. It's just a gate off progression to more difficult areas, but in vanilla, you can just, whatever, you can just go where you want. And I find that to be more fun. Maybe that's more frustrating for some people, but I just genuinely prefer that I can fucking go where I want. Ooh, I'm going to light that torch, and then we're going to end the video, even though I now realize we didn't actually go a whole lot of places. But that's fine. Basically, I'll have a link to the mod down here if you have vanilla Dark Souls 2. I'll have a link to my Scholar mod, if you have Scholar, which is going to be the majority of people. But for my vanilla homies, I see you, I love you, and I will always be there for you. Let's set this light. Nice. Oh my god, look at that RTGI. Oh my god. Okay, yeah, we'll do a last little test here. It's actually really nice in reshade. You can go into settings, and there's an option for save before and after pictures, and then you can actually just hit print screen, and it will actually save a before and after. It's so sick. So I'll show you. It calls one basically original, and then there's the other one that has the reshade effects. So basically it turns off all reshade effects automatically, and then, oh wow, that is a, well, that's a subtle difference. Wait, what happened to my RTGI? What happened? Oh, I had the RTGI turned off. Oh, wrong one. Kind of look cool though. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, that's my bad. I turned it off. Oh, look at that. That's sick. Come on. Look at how that light bounces. That's, yeah, that's the whole ticket right there. That's why we add RTGI to something. Because you're getting way more realistic illumination onto these, onto the environment. But it's still matching the original aesthetic. That's how I tune it, so it doesn't completely trample over how the game actually looks and the contrast. It's just contrast is boosted a little bit, but you're still getting the Dark Souls 2 experience, I think, just with more realistic lighting. And you can still play it at 60 FPS. But it's totally optional. That's a cool thing. Totally optional, and you can just play vanilla as is with the better textures and shadow casting, and then you're still good to go. But if you have the resources and you want to get a little bit more eye candy, that's where the INI file, the preset, comes into play. So thank you for watching. God, this video ended up being a lot fucking longer than I thought it was. But I love Dark Souls 2, and I love talking about it. And that's how I got my modding started, is with Dark Souls 2. So the excuse to be able to talk about it and update the mods. And hopefully have more people play vanilla Dark Souls 2. Let me know in the comments if you have played through it. Do you plan on playing through it? Are you going to listen to my galactic command that says you must play it at some point? And what are your memories of Dark Souls 2? What's your favorite Dark Souls game? How's your day going? Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.